Hello, and welcome to what I really learnt at school, Alfredian Voices. We can all remember our school days, the highs, the lows, the achievements and the challenges. But what we learnt and the experiences that shaped us are different for everyone. In this podcast series, we bring you the voices of old Alfredians, former students at the King Alfred School in North London, a school that has stood out from the crowd for the past 125 years for delivering a deeper learning experience. Highlighting their stories shows the impact that schools can have when they are bold and innovative, and crucially, take a child-centred approach to education. So join us as we discover what some of our old Alfredians really learnt at school and the impact it had on their lives. In this episode, we hear the voice of old Alfredian Helen Craig, artist and illustrator. A children's book illustrator and writer, she is best known for creating the Angelina Ballerina series of books with writer Catherine Hollibird.
Well, I did actually pass my school certificate. I got unexempted matriculation or whatever it's called. Somewhere I've got it, but anyway, I've got it somewhere.
Oh, wow. So what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Cass?
There it is.
Oh, this is wonderful.
Oh, very good.
Very good.
And I did an awful tight little drawing of a daffodil, which is what I knew exactly was what they want, whereas Ben's father, who I met at school, did this wonderful exploded image of a, daffodil and completely failed in the art, exams, you give them what they want. Anyway, now, what do I think? See, part of me thinks of Flint Hall Farm, which was where they were evacuated in the war. I had 3 years there. Then I had a year at St Mary's Town and Country. And it was an awful experience. And then I came back, lived in Diggs, and went to King Alfred's at Golders Green. Yeah. So it's a sort of mixture. I suppose I think of Squirrel Hall as much as anything, which was an outdoor covered place, and it was all wooden and a bit ramshackle. And each class was in a section. I don't know if we had the roll call there, I can't remember.
I think you had call over.
That's right, call over, that's it. But where did we have it at Royston? So I have these two images, they keep sort of exchanging, because Flint Hall Farm was wonderful and was really great. I've always meant to go back and look for it. My aunt always complained. She paid for us to go to King Alfred's, but she was very critical. She said, didn't give us enough grounding. But I hated school. I could never learn. I'm not the sort of person that can sit and take in information. I have to be doing something. So, if I think of King Alfred School, I think of doing these stages. And I loved it when I could do something like a map of the world of animals, so that I could paint something, or anything that you did a craft, like put a book together with images, but writing essays. And I remember when we had to do some books, and I chose The Life of a Great Lady, because I thought, this is great. I was an Elizabethan lady, because I could do cookery, I could do plants, I could do this. It covered a big range of things. And I think somewhere I've probably still got them. But the interesting thing about Royston, perhaps you've already been told this, but our classes were in stables, which had been sort of concreted up, and there was a slow but sure heater in the corner usually. We weren't allowed to shut the doors, even through winter. I don't remember them being shut. So it was pretty cold. And, of course, I suppose, do they still do it? We used to have a timetable. So I might have a history lesson, a maths lesson. And then I had an open lesson where the maths room and the geography room and something else was open, the French room, and their teachers would be sitting at the desk. So we had these folding tables. So when you went into the history room to have a lesson, everybody had folded up their tables, or maybe they were left out, I can't remember. But anyway, we would sit at these tables like a kind of picnic table. And so you go for the first lesson, say in the history room, and then maybe the second lesson was an open room, and you think, I must get my French stage done. So you'd nip along to the French. So you were always moving around outside, in and out of these rooms, which was extremely healthy. And during the war, King Alfred School was very proud of the fact that they never had an epidemic. Lots of schools had illnesses running through, but we didn't. It was very good because it meant you got up and went outside and got some good breaths of fresh air. So I remember all that, sitting, but you didn't like to get near the door. You wanted to get near the slow but sure, the these big heaters. But it was very dangerous because one of the big rooms, I think it was the history room, was a sort of rather nice room. It was a stable, and it had an open fire, and I got pushed onto it by mistake once, and my hand went on an ember. I had a big burn here, and at the same time I got appendicitis, emergency appendicitis, had to go into Addenbrooke's, to the old Addenbrooke's. But I mean, I think you'd never have an open fire in a children's classroom now, would you?
I know.
Things that we did.
You didn't board whilst you were there, though. You were...
No. Well, what happened was, and I was trying to work it out, my brother and I think John was there for one term boarding. I don't know why he... Anyway, we boarded with Mr. and Mrs. Morrish, George and Frida Morrish. He was a teacher in Royston at the place called the Green Lawn, which was by the Market Square. And it was a lovely place. And there were... I made it Christopher Saxon, who was called Greasy. I don't know why he was called Greasy. Chris Barber, who was the jazz musician. Yeah. John used to sleep in the same room as him. Andrew, who was a weird Polish boy who used to have tantrums, I think, I can't remember. John Bierman, who I was totally in love with. And he became a journalist. And then there was John and me, and I was the only girl. And I think it was because I was put there because I was only 9. So I had John as a kind of security. But they were lovely people.
And they were all staying in the Morrishes' house?
Yes. And so then we would walk to school through the Green Wall, which was all a bit extraordinary. But anyway, there we are. So, yes, I've put Squirrel Hall for meetings in King Alfred School, London. But what was the equivalent at Royston? I think call-over must have been in the big barn or something like that. And they used to, I made a note, on Saturday nights there would always be entertainments in the big barn. And the thing I do remember was I loved the nights when we had country dancing. We did a lot of country dancing. And people sneer at it a bit like they sneer at Morris dancing, but it's lovely. I mean, we either did it in the barn or sometimes we did it outside, but it was lovely.
So how old were you when you left Royston?
Well, so 9, 10, 11. My 12th year was at St Mary's Town and Country School, which was in Warwickshire, in a stately home, and not a very happy experience. It was bad. So, because the war had just ended and, my mother didn't know quite what to do, and she was not going to send me to a kind of local school in Braintree, which would have been male, female separated. There was still corporal punishment, etc., etc. She looked at, who is that amazing teacher who set up school, Summerhill?
Oh, yeah.
She went to Summerhill to look whether that would be good, and she thought, no, that's too far the other way. In the end, the decision was, because my father and my mother were separated, so that was another problem. So I ended up living in digs with sort of friends, Muswell Hill, which meant then I had to cut my bus to Gildersby, which was, at 13, 14, 15, it's a bit tough to be living away from home. But I always felt I was in the way somehow, very peculiar. So not a very relaxed childhood, that. Never mind, I haven't done too badly.
No.
I was writing all about the lessons, getting the teachers' help.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
That's one of my questions. What were the lessons like, and which teachers do you remember, and favourites and not favourites?
Yes. Well, funnily enough, we had these stages, and, then on the wall was each person had a little box with their subjects, and then we were supposed to colour in. So, if you got an A, any of the A pluses, you put in red. Blue for credit, I think. I think it was green for pass. I don't know what it was for failure. It was probably empty. But by the end of the term, and this was not good, this was a bad part of it. And funnily enough, my partner, Till Norland, got it changed when he became a head boy when I left. So for all to see, I hadn't completed my whole term, whereas somebody like Ralph Samuel, who was in my class, Margaret Table, read all the way through, a few blues, but mine it certainly wasn't. And I've never known how to do percentages to this day, because I think I've got a block about doing it. And it really was a humiliation at the end of the term to have this, to see how badly you'd done. But the one thing that King Alfred School did for me, and John, my brother, agrees with me, is that it taught us how to organise ourselves even if we failed, it still taught us if you're going to make your way, you've got to organise your time. Because it wasn't like going home and doing homework. You had to think about it yourself, how you were going to do it. You had to do it in fact, I don't think we were allowed to do homework. It all had to be done in the open sessions. I'm sure somewhere I've still got a timetable. So you had lessons, but you also had a couple of periods which would be open, where you could choose a room to go to and get help from the teacher to do that job, that piece of essay, because you couldn't do it alone. But yeah, teachers. There was a lovely man, I made a note, Mr. Fuller, Ronald Fuller. He was an English teacher. He gave me a poem called What If the Fowler My Blackbird Has Taken? I must find it. It's in the anthology of English poets. And he encouraged me to do a drawing of it. And I did a painting, strange painting. And he liked it. And it was good for me. That was good for me.
That's good.
Because I was never good at writing in that sense. I don't know why. I think my village school did something.
But then you write with your drawings. You tell stories with your...
No, but yes, exactly. Yeah. But he was lovely, and it was really rather sad because Till and I met him quite a few years later. He was sitting on a bench near the festival hall, and he looked kind of crumpled and sad. I think maybe he might have been gay. I think now I realise.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't realise at the time. And of course, in those days, tough, very tough, yeah. And it made me very sad because he'd been so kind to me. And I can still see that picture, and I'm sure I've got it somewhere. And he was really interested in what I'd done, you know. There you are. Ellen and Sally took me the other day back to my old village. It was lovely. They took me back to look at my old cottage, and I wanted to go to Wethersfield Church and see where my father had done a lovely picture, which I've got. I wanted to see it. So we went to the church, and there was a group of people having a coffee morning. And I met a lady there who had been at the school the same time as me, but she was 90, and so therefore about 2.5 years older than me, if I'm 87.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that her name is familiar, but I can't remember meeting her because, you know, I might not have actually been in a class with her.
Yes.
Now, Paul, I think he was in a higher class than me, but the reason I remember Paul Davis was because in the breaks, especially if it was not a very nice day, we'd go into the big hall, which was where we used to eat at lunchtime, and the gymnasium, blah, 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 and the stage, etc. And there was a piano in the corner, and I think it was Chopin he played most of it. He was just brilliant. He'd just sit down, and everybody just loved listening to him. So you know, and then I remember his father, who was my accountant, looking at me very severely and saying, "Miss Craig, you cannot spend more than you earn." Because I was writing mythical taxi journeys, because I thought, that'll be good, that'll be expenses, you know. In my youthful folly, didn't realise you couldn't do things like that. Well, I sort of thought I was being terribly clever by inventing a few taxis. I overdid it. And I can remember, I shall never forget him sitting behind his desk, because he was very, you know, sombre-looking gentleman in a suit. You cannot spend more than you earn. It was a good lesson. Yeah. Because, of course, it's true. What's the taxman going to say? Anyway, who else can I remember? And then there was a young boy called Richard, something I forget. They did Hamlet, and he played Hamlet. And he was just brilliant. And we all thought he was going to go on and become so famous. And I don't think anything happened, but it was like watching a professional. He was so good. And the other thing that was lovely, we had visiting lectures very often, quite regularly, and performers. We had Solomon, the pianist. He was an old Alfredian, and he came and played for us. And then we had a wonderful woman who came and spoke to us about the apartheid in South Africa. Really, you know, at that early age, and how serious it was. And, you know, it was so good. So Penelope would have been younger.
I was just trying to think.
And her and I had this sort of rivalry to this American, I remember his name was Willis Vanderschmidt, I think. And he came and spent a weekend with me, and my mother let us walk home in the dark one night, a mile from the village to our cottage. And she said she was very nervous. I shall never forget it. It was really very nice. But he played us off against each other, which was very naughty of him. And then my very good friend was Mary Lou Jennings. And her father was Humphrey Jennings, who was a filmmaker and was a good friend of my father's. They worked together in the Crown Film Unit during the war. And there was somebody, Beresford, Julian Beresford.
Beresford, yes.
We went out together a little bit at one time. He was Royston. So, you see, I've got these two separate King Alfreds. It's very strange. And I sort of resented, actually, the London King Alfreds, because I was kind of invested in the Royston one.
Yeah, that's the one that you went to.
Yeah. And the other thing that's lovely was, I made a note of it. Oh, yeah. The great joy of King Alfred's was being able to choose one's afternoon activities until, of course, you got up to the very sixth form. And at the end of each term, Berkey and his printers would have printed out a little form with all the names of all the things you could choose. So I used to opt for double art, bookbinding, leatherwork, musical appreciation, can't remember what else. And, of course, we had to have 2 periods of PE or PT, whichever you like to call it. But I usually managed to get out of those and go to art instead. Drama, I can't remember if there was drama. But it made school very bearable for me to have this, as long as I'd done the morning's work, I could look forward to an afternoon of craft or art. And the interesting thing when I was there, you've heard of John Berger, haven't you? Well, he's an art critic and writer. He was a student, a visiting student in the art department when I was there. And he was always trying to get me to be more imaginative, but I was being taught perspective and anatomy by my father at the time, and very rigid in things I did. But and later on, I photographed him. Oh, and the other thing, of course, when I was at Royston was the doodlebugs, because it was in the war, and I'd lie in bed and do you know the doodlebugs?
Yeah, I think Paul said that he used to try and look at them through the cracks.
Did he?
Yeah.
Well, they were like little planes, but, no pilot. And they were bombs, they were flying bombs. And the first ones used to come chunk, 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 and you'd hear them, and you'd hear this chunk, 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 chunk going in, and then it'd come over you, and it would go splutter and stop. And you knew as soon as it stopped, it was going to fall somewhere, and you didn't know if it was going to fall on you or coast and fall on somebody else. So it was a pretty scary thing.
Yeah,
it's really
that's
nasty.
terrifying.
Yeah, and they were like little, I remember seeing one in daylight, like little sort of black planes. Yeah, and then, of course, after that they had the V2s, which you didn't hear coming, and that was just a bang, and you were in the middle of it or you weren't.
And so your parents, how did they come across King Alfred School?
I have no idea. My father and mother were already separated, partly due to the war. And my mother was so against sending me to an ordinary secondary school where, as I say, there was, what would they call it? Where they separated.
Oh, the segregation.
Segregation and punishment. Corporal punishment then. She didn't like either of those things. So I think she couldn't go online, but obviously she did a bit of research.
What did your mum do then?
Well, my father was an art director in films and a bit of a wayward character. And, of course, the war separated them because we were in the country. He was in London doing fire duties with the war, and he was in the Crown Film Unit, which was a wartime film unit. Yeah. And my mother was having to make ends meet in the country, so she was typing authors' handwritten manuscripts. She was an expert at reading the most difficult writing. There was one writer who used to write this tiny writing, and she could read that. And then there was this other writer who wrote right across the page scrawling, and she could read that. I don't know how she did it.
Amazing.
And I've still got her typewriter because I just every now and then I listen to it because it's like hearing a cuckoo or smelling a lovely honeysuckle. It takes me right back to childhood. She did work very hard. And we had we lived in a little cottage with a bit of a field, small holding. So we grew raspberries and strawberries, and we had chickens, and we sold those. So I had to go out and pick things for people. I suppose my childhood was a lesson on how to survive, really, and which I have been doing. Yeah. Well, in the little cottage I lived in Wethersfield, you would wake up with icicles on the inside of the windows, and you would be so cold that you'd take your clothes into the bed with you, and you'd dress in bed somehow in order to keep warm, because if you got out it was so cold. Because we had no electricity and only running water if we pumped the water. Well, that was from the pond, and we had to collect drinking water from down the bottom of the lane. It was quite tough night. But, you know, it was tough while I had it, but I got very fond memories of it. And the atmosphere that I put into the Angelina books with the lamplight, that's when I get cross, when they want to change it and put electric light and all, you know. Well, there was one animation who wanted to do that. They wanted to put in telephones and radios, and they said no. Anyway, no one.
Yeah. How has CAS impacted your personal values, if you think it has?
Well, yeah. Well, it's this business of having to organise yourself with these stages of work rather than being forced to come back every morning with your homework, or I don't know how it works now. It was up to you to do it. And although I never completed my full amount of work, it did train me and my brother how to run your life in a way, you know, so that was good. But, no, it was a lovely school. I mean, as I say, I don't think I couldn't have found another school that would have suited my temperament.
Thank you for listening to this episode of What I Really Learnt at School, Alfredian Voices. We extend our gratitude to the old Alfredians who have shared their stories, allowing us to bring the vibrant history of the King Alfred School alive through this podcast series. Our 125th anniversary book, full of photos and material from our CAS archive, complements the stories you have heard. If you're inspired by what you've heard, want to connect with the school and the old Alfredian community, or if you simply want to find out more about King Alfred School's approach to education, please visit our website at www.kingalfred.org.uk. Until next time.